We often talk about childhood trauma as something that happens directly to a child. But what if the most damaging wounds come from what a child witnesses, absorbs, and learns in silence? Today's conversation is about the long shadow of childhood domestic violence and how it is affecting and quietly shaping adulthood in ways many people never connect back to their early years. Welcome to Healthy Mind, Healthy Life, the podcast where we explore mental health with clarity, compassion, and real world understanding. I'm Yusuf, and my guest today is Brian F. Martin, founder and the CEO of the Childhood Domestic Violence Association, best selling author of Invincible, and executive producer of the award winning documentary, The Children Next Door. Brian has spent decades helping the world understand what happens to our children who grow up around domestic violence, and more importantly, how healing and freedom are possible. Today, we are talking about the impact of childhood domestic violence, and what it means for adult mental and emotional health. With that, I welcome Brian to the show.
Yusuf, what a beautiful introduction, and thank you so much for the clarity. The clarity that you just bring to the introduction. That in and of itself can be really extraordinarily helpful because the vast majority of people don't know what to call this experience. Meaning, there are so many. There are 10 actually. Uh, Childhood home traumas. Traumas that most often occur and they take place in the childhood home. The least known is, what do you call it when you grow up witnessing domestic violence? And through the eyes of childhood, domestic violence is violence between parents or towards a parent. It can be physical, it can be non-physical, and most don't know to call it childhood domestic violence. And that is really the first step. So your introduction, just in and of itself, was quite healing.
Thank you so much, sir. That means a lot. I'm curious about something many people believe. There's a common idea that if a child isn't physically harmed, they'll be fine. From your experience, what does that belief get wrong?
Yeah, I can point out just two areas for anyone who has that belief. One, the research is pretty clear, and I'm not a researcher, but I work with a lot of researchers, and I respect their time, care, dedication, and they make it pretty clear. The psychological impact of witnessing violence between your parents is equally damaging, if not more damaging, than physical child abuse. Now, physical child abuse, of course, you feel that. You may have a mark. You feel that on your face. You feel that pain. It tends to be, uh, from a psychological standpoint, something that one can reconcile
Hmm.
a bit easier. Uh, so saith the researchers. I can also say, from my own experience in talking to tens of thousands of people who grew up in these homes, most tell me that they would have much rather themselves, you know, taken some physical abuse if they could have just slept through the nights to know that nothing would have happened, that they could have just, it would have been over. The waiting, the anticipation, the not knowing when it's going to happen, it's constantly on edge, constantly on eggshells, constantly vigilant. Uh, so that perception, I understand it. But if you talk to people who grew up in these homes, they'll tell you a very different story.
Mm, that's true. When children grow up witnessing fear, control, or unpredictability, What are they actually learning about relationships and safety in those moments?
One thing that I'll share on that is, um, there are no children, there are no adults. We're all just individual beings. We're passing through, right? We pass through childhood. We pass through young adulthood. We pass through adulthood. We pass through old age, and then we pass on again. Meaning, it's the same brain, the same eyes that you've seen out of, the same ears that you're hearing me with are the same ears that you heard with when you were in primary school or kindergarten.
Mm.
So it's not as though there are children and there are adults. When you experience this in childhood, it shapes your beliefs. It shapes your self-concept. It encodes a series of what we call at cdv.org and the work that we do through the book Invincible, they're called lies, meaning the lies that we tell ourselves that we are guilty, that we are angry,
Mm.
that we are worth less, meaning because that's what you learn in these households. And then the brain does its job. It finds evidence of what it believes is true or not. And then by the time you get into your young adulthood, you have these set of beliefs that are not supportive of where you want to go in life. And that is the mental health approach that we take in trying to avail these lies, and then also the corresponding truths, which is something, as to give you an example,
Mm.
Yusef, so many people who grow up in these homes, they believe they're guilty. They believe it was their fault. They believe they should have stopped it. They believe that what happened, it was because of them. And when you talk to someone and you say, geez, you know, is it a child's job to control the actions of an adult? Would you expect the same? Meaning, do you think a child could control your actions? So why would you have guilt about that? That simple question of questioning the lie brings them to a place of more freedom, meaning they're no longer guilty, they're free. They're free of that burden, and undeserved guilt is the worst guilt. They're free of that burden. They're lighter. They're free. Their mind talks less. And they're also free of that home,
Mm.
which is something to be grateful for.
You talk about the lies children internalize when they grow up, especially with domestic violence. Why do those beliefs form so deeply? And I think in most of the cases, they are very hard to unlearn as we grow up.
The um the three most cited researchers in this space, uh,
Okay.
15 or so years ago, uh, we gathered them together in New York City, and we had several sessions that all were recorded. And one of the questions was, what is it that someone who grows up in one of these homes, what do they believe about themselves? And they started talking. And as they talked, these researchers shared this common cluster of negative beliefs that, in their experience, are the most common things that individuals who grow up in these homes believe about themselves that are simply not true. And we've captured these in the 10 lies. And then the question, of course, to the researchers, Youssef, was, you know, what are the truths? When you see someone who's become resilient, when they are um, moving closer to their full potential, when they are unburdened, what does it look like? What do they now believe about themselves? And therein the truths were revealed. in those conversations. And the reason why it's so hard to go from the lies to the truths is because people don't know what to call this experience. How can you begin to reconcile it yourself if you don't even know it's a thing? Right? It's just something I witnessed. It can't possibly have an impact on me. That's why naming it, what you did right at the outset of this session, which I'm sure you'll do in the podcast title, when you grow up witnessing domestic violence, that's called childhood domestic violence. And that is the first step to understand.
For adults who are starting to recognize themselves in this conversation, where does healing realistically begin? Was the first meaningful step that they can take right now?
The first step they've taken because they've listened to your good work here. And that first step is to understand that you've probably, in that childhood home, that wasn't the only childhood home trauma you suffered. You suffered other childhood home traumas. This is the missing piece. This is the missing puzzle piece. Being able to name this one and understand that, oh my God, I did experience that. That did have an impact on me. And then what that winds up doing is you realize that you can have compassion for yourself for experiencing that. You realize that you're not alone because 1 in 8 people globally have experienced child domestic violence. This knows no border. It knows no geographic boundary. It knows no nationality. It is prevalent globally, and it is a common occurrence that so many people have, but far few talk about.
Okay. And how can someone begin challenging those early lies without feeling overwhelmed or broken in the process?
The first step after they know what to call it is if they're ready to share with someone who they know cares about them, if they're ready to share their experience, understanding that it was not their job to stop it. As they begin to share that experience with another, a trusted friend, family member, all of a sudden conversation transforms the meaning. There was one story of an individual that I heard who started sharing with a friend finally. And they said, I was there, I saw my mother get hurt time and time again when I was young. I was in first grade, second grade, primary school. I watched it from my room. I cracked the door. I heard it. I tried to stop it, but I couldn't. And what type of person lets the woman who created them, who bore them, how can I let her hurt each night? How can I not stop that? How can I hide? But I tried. I did all I could, but I just couldn't. And because of that, I'm worth less. Because of that, I have no confidence. I fear rejection, on and on and on and on and on. It was a very vulnerable thing to share. It was probably the person's greatest fear to share that out loud. And then the person they were talking to said, wow, I don't view you as being cowardly. I mean, after going through that at such a young age, what can possibly scare you now? You know, what can't you overcome now if you were able to go through that? I don't see someone who's weak. I see someone who's extraordinarily strong. I didn't have to go through that. I can't imagine going through that, but you went through it. I mean, what can't you handle now in life? What can you accomplish? What could possibly hold you back after facing that fear and moving through it? And from that conversation, Yusef, changed the meaning.
Yes. But the problem is healing is really or rarely linear. When old triggers resurface or progress feels slow, what helps people stay engaged rather than giving up on themselves?
And if someone's not ready, we actually do not use a lot of social media channels through our nonprofit, the Child of Domestic Violence Association, because this is not social media. This is not something you're going to like and thumb up because of so many people in your networks are family members. And you're not going to just like content on this. So we found that private media is far more helpful because so many people want to engage in this themselves privately. And that is why our nonprofit organization, through generous donors, have funded cdv.org, Childhood Domestic Violence, cdv.org, where we provide tools that are free of charge, simple to use, easy to understand, and worth the time, so that anyone who experienced childhood domestic violence can engage where they're at with the tool that makes most sense for them to take the first step.
Mm. Brian, for listeners who want to learn more or continue this work, where can they find you and your resources?
Yes, I would urge anyone who's interested, if they hear themselves in this situation, if they hear and can feel a loved one in this situation, that they visit us at www.cdv.org. And many of the topics that we cover are also covered in the book Invincible, the 10 Lies You Learn Living with Domestic Violence, Growing Up Living with Domestic Violence, and the Truths to Set You Free. And that book is available widely on many different platforms. All of the profits from that book go to the Child of Domestic Violence Association.
Perfect. And to all our listeners, all these links are in the show notes, so just go and check those out. Brian, is there any last message that you want to leave us with?
Yusuf, thank you for your work and for making this possible so that your audience and those who you support can learn about this topic. So if they find themselves or someone they love, in this issue, there's great hope, and the darkness is far behind compared to the light that you've been able to show here.
Thank you for joining us on Healthy Mind, Healthy Life. And if today's conversation resonated with you, take a moment to sit with it, share it with someone who might need it, or simply notice what is stirred inside you. Healing often starts with awareness, and we'll see you the next time. Thank you so much.